All right, in this first unit in our second semester in pre-AP biology at PBCHS, we're going to start learning about macromolecules and how they help cells to function. We did talk about macromolecules back in first semester, so some of this will be a review. But our guiding question today is, how do the various macromolecules support cellular function? As always, you should have some guided notes out in front of you, and you should be able to jot some things down as we go along here. All right, so just as a review, let's go through some of these terms. An element is the most basic building blocks of life, not lice. And some examples of an element would be oxygen, right? Hydrogen, H, or carbon, C, sulfur, S. These are the elements that you'd find in the periodic table, and we combine all of these to make what we call a molecule. Okay, now, a molecule is two or more elements combined to make a compound, such as water, H2O, or carbon dioxide, CO2. There's a few more videos on this back in semester 1 if you need it, so just let Dr. Sharda know if you do. Micro means small, and macro means big, and therefore when we talk about macromolecules, we are talking about large or big molecules. Okay? Now, one important aspect of the macromolecules is what they are made up of. Okay? We talk about monomers, and the building blocks of a larger molecule are very important because that will change the properties of that molecule, that macromolecule, right? The monomers of a brick wall are individual bricks. These characteristics are different from the monomers of this Afghan, right? This is a blanket and it's made up of yarn and these individual squares. The qualities of the larger blanket are very different from the brick wall. Here's a human pyramid. The monomers here would be the individual cheerleaders. Okay? So monomer is a very important term here. All right, so let's look at the first one. Our first macromolecule is a carbohydrate. These are also known as sugars. The elements going into a carbohydrate are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. If you think about a carbon that's been very hydrated, you're going to get a carbohydrate. Okay? These carbohydrates serve as fuel for our cells. They also give us fiber. A lot of fiber in our diet comes from carbohydrates, and they offer structural support as well. Okay? The monomer of a carbohydrate is a simple sugar. Yes, a carbohydrate is a sugar. Some of them are pretty long. Here's a starch molecule. This is a carbohydrate. It has a lot of these glucose monomers strung together, but if you break that down, you will end up with glucose. So these simpler sugars like glucose or maltose are the monomers of carbohydrates. Some examples of carbohydrates are cellulose. Look at the OSE there. Anything with OSE at the end is a carbohydrate. Glucose, here's glucose, and lactose. This is something that some people are allergic to in milk. Okay, several examples of carbs. All right, one really cool, I think, a really cool image of cellulose in the plant cell wall shows the strength of this carbohydrate. This is offering structural support in the plant cell wall, and it is fascinating to me to realize that plants have figured out that by laying down these fibers, cellulose fibers, in this organized way, allows them to grow upwards instead of outwards. Now, why would this be important? Well, plants need to grow upwards to get to the sun before their neighbor does, or they will be shaded and they will die. So any plant that was lazy enough to just let its fibers kind of arrange themselves like that, they're not going to get very far in life. But the ones who figured out, the ones who started laying down their fibers in an organized fashion like this, they were the ones that grew the fastest, and they were able to survive and reproduce. So evolutionarily speaking, these are the winners. Okay, nucleic acids. There are two examples of nucleic acids. One is RNA and one is DNA. Okay, we know about DNA. This is the recipe book for our proteins. Okay, the instruction manual for our proteins. Nucleic acids are made of nucleotides. These are the monomers. And I forgot to mention uracil as a monomer here, but RNA uses cytosine, or C, guanine, G, adenine, A, and uracil, U, to make up their this single helix. Okay? DNA uses cytosine, C, guanine, G, adenine, A, and thymine. Okay, so this is the main difference here. Uracil and thymine are the one difference between DNA and RNA, besides the fact that this is single-stranded and this is double-stranded. These two macromolecules are really important for as instruction manuals, right? They are saying we need this many of this protein and this is how you need to make them. So these are kind of these two, well, DNA lives in the nucleus, and the RNA kind of goes back and forth between the nucleus and the cell. So we'll learn a little more about that in a little bit here. All right, lipids. Lipids can include fats, steroids. Did you know that steroids are lipids? Probably not. Oils and waxes. All of these things occur in our bodies and are important. These are mostly made out of carbon and hydrogen with some oxygen included as well. Lipids repel water, and therefore they are hydrophobic, right? They fear water. The monomers of lipids are fatty acids. Okay, these are long chains, fatty acids. They kind of look like little legs here. Here's the head. Lipids serve as energy, and they offer membrane structure. Okay, they basically make up membranes, and they can act as chemical messengers like steroids, right? Now, membranes are two layers of phospholipids, and that's why we call them phospholipid bilayers. Okay? If you take a close look at the membrane, the extracellular means outside the cell, and intracellular means within the cell, inside the cell. All right, so you have two layers of these phospholipids, and their legs are basically pointing at each other because those are the hydrophobic parts, so they are facing away from the water, and a whole sphere, or let's see, a bunch of these surrounding the inside of the cell would make a vesicle. Okay? We'll get into that a little more later, but lipids are incredibly important for membranes. Here's another look at the membrane. We have these phospholipids in a bilayer, right? Two layers of phospholipids. And these are loosely connected to each other. Just think about maybe them loosely connecting pinkies, but they can move around. They can even flip in and out of the membrane. Their legs are always going to be pointing at the inside of the membrane, but they also are surrounding these membrane proteins. Okay, which are connected sometimes to carbohydrates that act as signals to the outside cell. Maybe they would say, hey, I'm this kind of a cell, or I was just attacked by this kind of bacteria and you should be looking out for it. Okay, lots of different signaling occurs in the body in living organisms. Pretty fascinating, actually. Here's a channel protein, a protein that has a channel in the middle of it, which means things can go through it. So this is one way that things will enter a cell or exit a cell. All right, here's a picture of some fat that might be floating on your bowl of noodles or your soup. If you've ever played with them, you know that if you were to touch right here with your spoon or your fork, that these would probably fuse together and make a bigger glob. Okay, that's a lot. That is due to the property of these lipids that are not they're not rigid, right? They they can kind of glob together, fuse together. It's kind of fun to play with these. All right, here is kind of a fun video of an amoeba using its membrane flexibility to eat a paramecium. Okay, so the membrane is rearranging itself so that it can kind of surround the paramecium, its lunch, and it's making the cytoplasm stream into this area to help the phospholipids move around it. And at some point, the amoeba, this guy, will probably start shooting in some digestive enzymes to break down the paramecium and allow it to absorb all the nutrients. Kind of fascinating. All right, proteins. This is our last macromolecule. These are made out of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Right? It is important to know where we get our nitrogen from because we need nitrogen for our proteins. And we need proteins to do anything in life. Proteins are made of long chains of amino acid monomers, and these amino acids require proteins. Proteins are the workhorses of the cell. Okay, they're like this guy up here. They are directing traffic. They all have one job to do. They might be regulating cellular respiration. They might be transporting things. They might be forming bones or muscles. Regardless, every single protein has one job to do, and they do that from start to finish. So here's an example of one of those proteins. This is a kinesin and a microtubule. So this long thing here is part of the cytoskeleton. This is like a railroad track that forms and also gets broken down as needed in the cell. Now the kinesin, this protein, is shaped in such a way that it can attach to the cytoskeleton, right, the tracks, but it can also attach itself to this vesicle. Maybe it's holding on to some of those carbohydrates on the membrane, and this is how it is moving it through the cell, which I think is so cool. Okay, so this is a kinesin. They literally call this kinesin walking. Looks like a little guy that would come out of a comic book, but it's a motor protein, right? Something that's involved in moving stuff. So cool. Okay. All right, another example of a protein, really important protein, is an enzyme. Enzymes can digest things. They break them apart. Enzymes can also, depending on their function, some can bring things together. Okay, they catalyze reactions, so they speed up chemical reactions, and they are very specific to the substrate. They have to be shaped in a certain way to bind to a certain carbohydrate or any kind of molecule. Okay, they are not going to just, Velcro onto anything. They have to be shaped in a certain way. But when they are, then, so for example, here's the substrate. Let's say this is lactose. If it fits directly into the enzyme, then this enzyme is able to do its work. Okay. So let's see. The main points here are that we need you to know what the monomers are of each macromolecule. Okay, if you can't remember what those are, go back and review this slideshow. That's very important. And what is the function of each macromolecule? What do each of the macromolecules do for our bodies? Okay, and in summary, how do the various macromolecules support cellular function? Okay. It would be good to know where each of the macromolecules might be found, what organelles, what part of the cell, all sorts of things like that. All right, thanks for listening.